Derek Chauvin is guilty. The former Minnesota police officer was convicted of 2 counts of murder and a lesser charge of manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. That's after Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes during an arrest nearly 1 year ago. Together, the charge carried maximum stay in prison of 50 years, although sentencing is still weeks away. The city of Minneapolis read a sigh of relief after sometimes violent demonstration rocked the city last May. But will this change the course of policing in America? Rise correspondent Lori Laird reports.
Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty.
Derek Chauvin was convicted on 2 further counts, prompting Judge Peter Cahill to revoke his bail conditions.
We would move to have the court revoke the defendant's bail and remand him into custody pending sentencing.
Bail is revoked, bond is discharged, and the defendant is remanded to the custody of the Hennepin County Sheriff. Anything further?
All
right. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Leading the former police officer to await sentencing from a jail cell. Outside the courthouse, cheers as word of the verdict spread through what's now known as George Floyd Square in downtown Minneapolis. A sharp contrast to the social unrest that racked much of the country last summer in the wake of Floyd's murder. That anger over discriminatory police action toward minorities spread internationally.
Black trans lives matter!
Spawning Black Lives Matter demonstration in London and other cities. One of America's foremost civil rights leaders applauded the efforts of activists in fighting for justice.
We don't celebrate a man going to jail. We would have rather George be alive.
Amen.
But we celebrate that because young people, white and black, some castigated, many that are here tonight, marched and kept marching and kept going. Many of them looked down on, but they kept marching and wouldn't let this die.
Sharpton appeared at a briefing with civil rights lawyer and Floyd family attorney Ben Crump. But before that, Crump and Floyd's family took a phone call from a man who has been following the trial from thousands of miles to the east.
Hello. Hello. Hey, how you doing?
How's Gianna doing?
Feeling better now. Nothing is going to make it all better, but at least God, now there's some justice.
Right.
And I think a Gianna's coming. My daddy's going to change the world. He's going to start to change it now.
That's right.
Yes.
After offering those words of support, President Joe Biden then addressed the nation.
Today's verdict is a step forward. I just spoke with the governor of Minnesota, who thanked me for the close work with his team. I also spoke with George Floyd's family again. A remarkable family of extraordinary courage. Nothing can ever bring their brother, their father back. But this can be a giant step forward in the march toward justice in America.
Biden also vowed to reform policing in the U.S., a pledge he may struggle to fulfill. The Democrat-controlled House of Representatives passed the George Floyd bill last year, with Floyd's brother Phalanis on hand to witness proceedings. But the bill has stalled in the Senate, where Republicans have opposed nationwide police reform. After Chauvin's convictions, many African Americans say they can breathe. A reversal of Floyd's final words, "I can't breathe." But earlier this month, another African American lost his life at the hands of police, just 10 miles north of the site of Floyd's trial. Dante Wright was shot dead after a traffic stop, causing many African Americans to believe that the hard work of police reform is only just beginning. Lori Laird, Arise News.
All right, so joining us now from London's Gas and I, back at this landmark case, Arise correspondent Lori Laird. Lori, I mean, what does this mean for all of us? I mean, Because when I saw that judgment yesterday, my mind just went to another man that his case was so profound, Amadou Diallo, you know, and all the African-American people that have been killed by police in America and never got justice, and now we can truly breathe. What's the symbolism of this, Laurie?
Well, and you're so right to point out that while there was a verdict in this particular case, the list of African-American men and women who have suffered at the hands of police, and in most cases the police were never held accountable, that list is very, very long. I think what is significant, what is symbolic about this case is not that justice has been done. And we heard that through so many people, so many community leaders, activists, politicians. They're not saying justice has been done. If justice had been done, George Floyd would still be with us. That is what they're saying. However, many people believe that finally a police officer has been held accountable. A police officer caused bodily harm, caused death to an African-American man. He stood trial, the police officer. He was judged by a jury of his peers. He was found guilty. He looks like he will be spending decades behind bars, although sentencing will not occur for a while. So I think the fact that at long last, police have been held accountable, that is what has been so significant for so many people, not just in the U.S., but around the world. This case has been covered worldwide, and I suspect that we're not the only international channel that is talking about this morning.
Right. I understand we have a quick commercial break. We'll take the break, and people on the panel will get to ask you more questions, Laurie. We'll be right back after this. Right, welcome back. Laurie, if you're still there, we'll just continue with the questions here.
Well, Laurie, good to see you again. You talked about accountability, transparency and accountability, and there are persons who say justice has been done, and that this is a landmark moment, not just for U.S. policing and the justice system in the United States, but also for the whole world, considering the fact that there was the Black Lives Matter movement. But do you think that all the commentators have been overly optimistic, considering the fact that 25 minutes to the delivery of that judgment that found Chauvin guilty, in Ohio, Columbus, a young lady, 15 years old, was also killed by the police. Would this lead to police reform, or, you know, this is just just symbolism rather than an attempt or a signal that something will be done about police reform in the U.S.?
And that is very much the big question. And to show you the gravity of the situation that many African Americans face at the hands of the police, you mentioned that incident in Columbus, Ohio. Let's go back a couple of days and talk about Dante Wright. Dante Wright, a 20-year-old African American man, was stopped, a traffic stop. His car registration was out of date. This happened 10 miles north of the Minneapolis courtroom where Derek Chauvin's trial was going on. While this trial was going on, while the state of Minnesota was on tenterhooks, Dante Wright lost his life. When he tried to flee the scene, he was shot. He later died. So the fact, many people think that the fact that police were not overly sensitive in the vicinity of Minneapolis while this trial was going on really does show that the culture of policing has to change. Now, has to change, most people agree on that. Will it change? That is very much an open question. And efforts to reform the police have faltered so far. I was listening to a prominent commentator, a man called Charles Ramsey, who was on U.S. television last night. He is an ex-police commissioner of Philadelphia, an ex-police chief of police in Washington, D.C. So he's a man who has seen policing at the sharp end in two of America's most dangerous cities. He keeps saying the culture has to change. The culture has to change. And that could take generations. But there are things that can happen now. There is legislation that could be enacted, and that hasn't happened yet. And that is concerning to a lot of African Americans. Last year, before the elections, the democratically controlled Congress passed what's called a Justice in Policing law. They also nicknamed the George Floyd law. And this tightened policing reforms. It couldn't get through the Senate. In fact, it's been stalled in the Senate. So whether Congress, any kind of significant policing reform has to come through the legislature. It can't come directly from the president. It has to be passed by Congress. We're not seeing any evidence right now that Congress is ready to take up the baton here.
Which leads me to my next question, and I have two for you. The importance of collective action. To what extent would you attribute the fact that there was something in the George Floyd tragedy that united the whole of America, and in fact the whole world? We actually transcended race, social background or what have you, for one of the very rare occasions that I've witnessed in my life. And we're all just human beings in solidarity against this kind of evil. So do you think that that momentum will then affect Congress so that they will do what they ought to do? Or do you think that that's happening in the general populace, but there's too much political interest on that score? And also, I wanted to talk about Derek Chauvin's... I'm sorry, I have a second question for you, Laurie. I wanted to talk about his reaction, Derek Chauvin's reaction.
Of course.
Did you notice the furrowed brow, eyes darting everywhere when the sentence was read? Do you think he will appeal?
Two absolutely excellent questions. Let's take them in turn. In terms of momentum, does this case provide momentum for Congress to pick up legislation again? Look, that can go either way. Not every Democrat in the House of Representatives voted for police reform when it passed the House, so it'll be even harder to get anything through the Senate, where votes are split evenly across each party. It's possible that some Republicans will say, look what happened in the Chauvin trial. He was found guilty. The judiciary took care of this, so we don't have to act as legislators. That's certainly a possibility. As for what galvanized people, absolutely, these movements that we saw across the U.S., across the world, you're absolutely right when you say that the protests, the demonstrations after George Floyd's death united so many people, of different races, different classes, different ages, different education levels. And I think the one thing that united people was that video that was distributed, the video that we all saw, the video that took all of our breath away. And that was Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck. It was very, very difficult to watch that video and feel anything but fear, terror for what many Americans or many people of color throughout the world have to go through. And that may be what changes things going forward, that we are in an era where things are documented. That we saw video from so many different sources, and in fact, some of the video that we saw through the trial was shot by a 17-year-old who testified in Derek Chauvin's trial. And I think the fact that bystanders can document injustices may help things along. There's much more transparency than we've ever seen. As for the appeal, this is a very, very interesting question. Derek Chauvin's team has 60 days to launch an appeal. I think most legal analysts would be gobsmacked if there was not an appeal, particularly after a funny incident in the court just as the trial was drawing to a close. Judge Peter Cahill, who was presiding over events, was asked to declare a mistrial by the defense. This is because a Democratic Congresswoman, Maxine Waters, went to Minneapolis and said, look, if there is not a guilty verdict, we have to demonstrate harder. It sounded a little bit like a call to arms. The defense asked to dismiss the trial altogether because Ms. Waters' comments may have been seen as prejudicial to the jury. That right there could provide grounds for appeal. We also think that the defense may argue that it was impossible for Chauvin to get a fair trial in Minneapolis, where everybody, the entire pool of jurors, would have known about the events of May 25th, 2020, and may have been influenced by them. Another extenuating factor is that 2 weeks before the trial started, or 2 weeks after this, 2 weeks ago, let me get my story straight here. 2 weeks ago, while jury selection was going on, the city of Minneapolis settled a civil suit with the Floyd family for $25 million. To the defense, that was an admission of guilt. The defense may argue that that also could have prejudiced the jury. So there's a number of reasons that we may see an appeal. We may have to wait a couple of weeks or as long as 8 weeks before that appeal is launched.
Right, well, let's see sentencing, but I want to talk about the symbolism amidst all of the furore about citizen journalism and the social media and fake news and all of that. That night when this incident happened, the Minneapolis Police Department reported something entirely different. But it took the courage of a 17-year-old, like you said, Danielle Fraser, to post that video on a Facebook page. And her words this night, when that judgment was given, was, "Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God." I mean, what's the symbolism of that? It took a 17-year-old, to make a mark of justice in history.
And the young Miss Fraser also testified in the trial. She testified, we could only hear her voice. She was out of vision because she was a minor when she witnessed the event. But her testimony was so moving. And look, this was a trial replete with moving testimony, but for some reason hers struck me. It was so dramatic, and she spoke about how after witnessing George Floyd's death that she couldn't sleep at night. She was up awake at night wondering, what could she have done? Could she have saved George Floyd? And then she said in her testimony, "I knew it wasn't my job to save George Floyd. It was the policeman's job to save George Floyd. And yet I'm still kept awake at night." It was absolutely moving testimony from someone who is still a child. And I think the prosecution made very good use of eyewitnesses, made very good use of the emotions that people felt when they witnessed this. And that's something that was also quite striking. This is a tragedy for George Floyd's family, for his friends, but so many bystanders were so deeply affected emotionally by this, and you could feel their trauma. It will take the city of Minneapolis and much of America a long time to process what they saw on that video.
All right.
Well, the prosecution counsel talked about what you saw. And he used that as a major plan for his argument. 45 witnesses, 15 days trial. But okay, thank you, Laurie Lade.
Thank you so much, Laurie. That's all on News Headline. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have Ruth Zadiri, Michael Wilson, Adesu Amaro, Aaron Akiritala to give us updates on Africa, global business, COVID-19, and sporting activities across the globe. Stay with us. All right, pleasure to have you back to the morning show right here on the Rise News channel. Let's quickly go to our dependable Ruth Zadiri. Hi, Ruxus, how's it going? Africa Business Update, up to you.
Good morning, Rufai. Fine, thank you. Good morning, Tundu. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning to all our viewers. We kick things off in the Senate. The Senate is calling for cement liberalization. Lola Ashiru, who is a senator from Kwara, led a motion along with about 5 other senators calling for cement liberalization in terms of giving tax incentives and other types of incentives to other players to allow them to come into the sector in order to bring down the price. As we know, bag of cement has increased, I think it's about 35% year on year for March. In other areas of the country, it's as much as 40%. The COVID-19 pandemic is one reason, supply chains, exchange rates, and a number of others. You've both had representatives from the sector here on the morning show to talk about this. So now the Senate is pushing for it. So it remains to be seen how the government will be able to provide those incentives to allow other players to come in. As you know, it's 3 main players in the sector, and so they're looking to try to get that, bring those prices down. To another matter, I want you all to take there's a video we're about to play that was released online called Secure Ikoyi, and well, you know what? Let's play the video.
Ikoyi is the choice area of residence for the affluent in Lagos. Those who can afford it choose it for its serenity and security. From an aerial view, Banana Island and its environs are breathtaking, with its fast-developing luxurious architectural masterpieces, beautifully arranged tree-lined streets, and quiet, serene environment. However, at close quarters, Turnbull Onikoyi Road and Banana Island Road residents are hit with a stark reality. They live in a ghetto. They are now overrun with street hustlers, squatters, unregistered taxis yelling out destinations. It's basically a scene you would usually find at overcrowded bus stops, reminiscent of Ajegule. There are multiple food sellers, barbershops, thugs, and gambling stations at every turn, perched under trees. There are boys clustered in large groups, smoking hemp and watching residents. No one knows who these trespassers are, where they came from, or what their mission is. What is obvious is that the supposed highbrow areas of Parkview Estate, Banana Island, and Onikoyi Road are under siege. Something needs to be done fast.
Here's the thing. The Chinese, right, are reportedly the biggest buyers of luxury real estate around the world. They buy real estate in New York, in Russia. If you're a Chinese investor and you're looking at Ikoyi, which is, reportedly the most expensive, one of the most expensive real estates in Africa, what do you think when you see a video like that? Also, the class discrimination message in the video. I mean, this is all borders on insecurity. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
But before I launch into my thoughts, are you done with your report?
Yes, go right ahead. Yeah.
Right. I find it extremely distasteful and alarmist. And there's something in that video that reminded me of the colonial era when the British had residential segregation. And according to Lagos law, the first Nigerian who was allowed to move into Ikoyi, because Ikoyi was an exclusive enclave of our white colonial masters, the first Nigerian who was allowed to move there was the late Chief S.L. Edu. This whole invaders, how dare they cut their hair? Look, they're sitting under a tree. What are they doing there? I think it's really in very poor taste. The fact of the matter is there's a lot of construction that goes on in that axis, and a lot of those people are working on those sites. A lot of those people are staff of people who live there. Now, there was an increase in crime in Ikoyi, but guess what? There was an increase in crime everywhere all over Nigeria. So the idea that Ikoyi would somehow be exempt, why? And, I generally don't understand the animus a lot of people feel towards the rich. But then I see a video like this, and then I get it. This video is elitist, and it's in very poor taste. The tone of it is all wrong. But there has been increased police presence. I'm aware that a lot of people were flushed out of uncompleted buildings. Some people were living there because it was said that uncompleted buildings could be used to harbor criminals. In Ikoyi, same as anywhere else in Nigeria. So this whole sort of attempting to exclude one particular area it's offensive, actually.
Well, Tondo, you did well by speaking first as an Ikoyi landlady. So, Rogers, now listen to the tenants. Listen to the...
Dr. Batty.
No,
Dr. Batty.
No player in the sector.
No offense intended.
Dr.
Listen to the tenants. Now, I first noticed this during the NSAS protest.
Right.
When I noticed what we should just label as the slumification of Ikoyi. Ikoyi is supposed to be an elite neighborhood, upscale property zone. But during that NSAS protest, we saw a lot of these people who are also residents of Ikoyi their population, in fact, if there is a census, probably overwhelms that of the landladies and the landlords of Ikoyi. And I guess that was the reason why many of the residents' associations in Ikoyi at that time had to organize to take care of the interest of these other people who have moved from the mainland to the island to take over Ikoyi. Now, what are the issues involved? One, I think first is the fact that you have many squatters in Ikoyi at the moment. Many of these people, they live on the mainland, they work for people on the island, they don't go home. They stay on the island Monday to Friday. Now, if there is no provision for them, maybe they are construction workers or they are artisans or whatever, look, they will occupy any property or they will just exist within the Ikoyi space as homeless people. And so you find them at various roundabouts. Now, the video that you showed talked about Tumble Road, about Banana Island and Onikoyi Street. Look, it's all over Ikoyi. And the problem associated with it is one of security. Drugs are involved. Homelessness is also another factor. Now, what is the Lagos State government doing? Exactly. I think the major import of your story is for us to call out the Lagos State government to say, look, Lagos State, what are you doing about this slumification of Ikoyi? And this is not about an elite conversation. It's just about security. It's about drugs. It's about the risk that is posed to lives and properties on this side of the city. The second point has to do with development. You recall that the Obasanjo government at the time did what they called monetization, and before then there was movement out of Lagos to Abuja as the federal capital. There are many abandoned buildings in Ikoyi and Victoria Island. Now, we have a crisis of housing, of homelessness in Nigeria. So anybody who doesn't have any house in any part of Lagos, it's very easy to just move to the Ikoyi Victoria Island axis and occupy those places. Right. Now, I don't envy people who live permanently on the island because there's no difference between them and the people who are on the mainland now. And there is an urban crisis, urban planning crisis, that I think that long term, the Lagos State government and the federal government, we need to address.
Yes.
Every morning, the Third Mainland Bridge, the Eko Bridge, the Kata Bridge, they are congested because every company has its headquarters, its main office on the island. Now, that's not how urban planning is done in other parts of the world. You distribute it, right. You reduce pressure. So this Ikoyi and Victoria Island that is supposed to be uptown, it's no longer uptown if you really, take a critical look at it. So right. These, I think, are the problems that we're dealing with. Many of those people, they are squatters. Many of them are homeless. Some of them are construction workers because at the same time, there is a lot of construction going on here. Yeah. As a result of the cost of transportation, many of those construction workers, some of them who have families on the mainland, who have residential spaces on the mainland, they cannot go home. They stay on the island, they work here for the rest of the week, and then when it is weekend, they go home and come back. But the bigger problem is the security challenge, is the drug problem, is the slumification of Ikoyi. Yeah. So it's no longer fashionable to say, I live in Ikoyi. All of us are here now.
Dr. Abati, keep rubbing it in. Keep rubbing it in. For me, what I see the youth bulge. Rotus, we keep talking about this problem. There's a youth bulge. There's massive unemployment. There's all sorts. We've not been able to cater to our young people. Right. That's what is happening in Ikoyi, the youth bulge. And let me tell you something. I predict it will increase. You know why?
It will, yeah.
It will increase because you have an economy that cannot employ people that are even getting out of university.
Right.
You've got 33% unemployment rate. You've got 100 million people living in poverty. Where will they go?
Population growth as well.
You've got population growth 2.6, let's say 3%, 2.6, 2.7%.
Right.
We have a country where we don't know how many million people we have in the country. We're talking to the census people yesterday.
Yes, I watched the interview yesterday, yeah.
This is the youth bulge we've been talking about. Yeah. It's come home to roost.
Right.
So it's not about doing videos to create alerts. It's about these people and the government coming together to look for ways to solve the problem. Because if you engage this same youth bulge and they've got somewhere to go,
right,
then something can happen.
Exactly.
we can start to change things. And it's been done in Lagos. I'll give you an instance. A certain man called Buba Marwa was governor of Lagos. And there used to be a lot of what we call area boys, street urchins and the likes. But you remember when he started the Good Boys of Lagos scheme, that he started using most of those people they call street urchins and area boys, provided a mechanism at which they could get them jobs to do, and they could come hire them to go do jobs for them. As soon as Buba Marwa left, I don't know what happened to that scheme. So we can actually fix it. It is a problem begging for solution, and it's staring at us.
If it is of any comfort, this problem is not restricted to Ikoyi.
Right.
In other parts of Lagos, we face the same problem.
Which is my point.
You will recall
Yeah.
that during the NSAS protest, we had these 1 million boys in the Agege Abule Egba axis. These are also homeless people, unemployed people.
Right.
So really, the 33.3% unemployment rate that the Bureau of Statistics reported is something that government needs to address. And for me, this is a wake-up call. Second issue that you raised about the fuel queues in Abuja. Well, I think the response of the NNPC has been quite impressive. The NNPC tried to, increase the truck out rate from 550 trucks to about 1,660 trucks. And we've been assured by the NNPC through Dr. Kenny Obatero that the NNPC is not the cause of the fuel queue witnessed in Abuja. What they have to do is to make sure that this does not spread to other parts of the country. And the intervention that they have promised, I think it's a good idea, and they should try to see how they can help, not just NNPC, but government officials also, to resolve the causative problem, which is disagreement between the truck drivers, tanker drivers, as they are called, and the National Association of Transport Owners of Nigeria over compensation package. I think that, that's the way forward. But the bigger question that the GMD of NNPC tried to address is about subsidy. He has assured us that the complete deregulation of the downstream sector will not take place in April and may not even take place in May. But it looks like the big elephant in the room that the Nigerian government will still have to address at some point. He says whichever way it is resolved, it will be fair to Nigerians. I don't know what he means by that. Melekiar is saying there will still be some measure of subsidy. But that's in the future, and all of us as Nigerians, as citizens, as consumers of petroleum products will have to confront it when it comes to the table.
All right. Thank you so much, Rotus, for your time. Really appreciate you, my friend. All right, moving on to business update. Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Michael, great to have you. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, so I was looking around for some reasons for what we're seeing at the moment, which was a sort of global sell-off, really. I mean, you could say that we were due some kind of correction given recent gains. I mean, I've canvassed a bit of opinion this morning. That seems to be the most likely reason. There's also a sort of nagging doubt that this inflation is on the way. I'll give you a little bit more detail about that later. I've got two quite important bits there. But there's also a nagging doubt that the economic recovery that's actually been priced into stocks is not revealing itself yet. In particular, airlines, of course, have been particularly hit hard. So we've seen a bit of weakness, really, as far as Asia's concerned. This morning, Nikkei falling especially sharply. One of the key concerns has been sharp, as I say, that this potential for inflationary pressures. And again, I do have something to say about that slightly later on. We're going to hear from the Chinese president on Thursday. That's tomorrow. He's giving a video conference at a global leaders debate, and they're going to be talking about climate change. Reducing carbon emissions is one of the few areas that China and the United States have said they're going to cooperate on. We'll hear what they have to say. We have heard all this before from large developing economies, of course. The fact that they are, they bow to the demands of climate change, but they also say that, quite honestly, we want to grow our economies. That's the priority. So that's always going to be potentially interesting to hear what he's going to say. Staying with China big tech groups have actually called what we would term called the gamekeepers in, poachers versus gamekeepers and the rest of it. Tencent, ByteDance, Alibaba and so on, they've actually hiring former government regulators to come in to try to navigate around this government crackdown that's happening in China on tech companies. And this kind of revolving door, from politics to business, we've talked about it happening in the UK, it happens in the United States, it doesn't happen very often in China, but that's a move at the moment. TikTok, I'm going to bring your attention to this as well. This is taking place in London's High Court. They could be in for billions of dollars worth of, and its parent, of course, ByteDance, could be in for damages worth billions of dollars. What's been happening is that the Children's Commissioner for England and Wales said this morning that affected children, what's been happening is kids have been using TikTok, and it's felt that information has been taken from them and may be used towards unknown third parties. So that's going to be a very interesting legal battle. I'll take you through the United States, just a bit of recap. Futures have fallen overnight, quite honestly. Back-to-back losses on Wall Street, which you will have noticed if you were following it yesterday. United Airlines down 8.5% and so on. The VIX, remember the volatility index? We've talked about it slightly before, based in Chicago. It's known as the fear gauge. It's up again. So people are, whilst we've been going through a reporting season in the United States, which has been giving quite steady and firm results, and the Dow and the S&P 500, they're up 10% on the year so far. They're not doing too badly. But there is generally, there's something underneath this market that's worrying people. And I'm not exactly sure what it is. I'm guessing, as I said to you earlier, it might be that the market's gone as far as the people feel it's going to go and they're just taking money off the table. Maybe there's a bit of fear of inflation, again, which I'll come on to. Netflix reported a slowdown in subscriber growth. Only 3.98 million signed up between January and March. Well, it is a lot, but it's well short of the 6 million that was predicted. So their shares down 11%. Technical nerds always have a look at Apple, and it produces its new products, and we're supposed to sort of kowtow to what's been going on. They've got some new colours, the iPads are better and all the rest of it. I think possibly the most interesting thing, apart from the stuff for geeks, is that it's announcing a new podcast subscription service next month. So that means that it'll place itself in competition with Spotify and other competitors in the audio streaming, if that's what you do. As you can see behind me, my shelves tend to be full of CDs, but I'm very old-fashioned, of course, naturally. Okay, the ECB, as far as Europe's concerned, meets today and tomorrow. It'll be pretty technical stuff. The thing is that recent economic figures around Europe, I mean, we've heard a lot of stories about the pandemic, the vaccine rollout being very, very slow indeed. And there won't be a big change in policy stance, but it could be that the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme, that jauntily named little thing, or PEP as we call it, P-E-P-P, it could be actually some of that, so that won't change the overall sum, but they may, as they were hinting last time, actually bring some of that QE forward a little. Again, very, very technical. Now, something which isn't technical is that all 6 Premier League teams in the United Kingdom have said no thanks to the European Super League. This is an important story, not because of the football, not because of the players, but because of the fans. They've clearly bowed to the fans themselves, Arsenal, Liverpool, Man United, Tottenham, as well as Man City, all saying to the huge revolt by the fans about this Super League stuff, and they bowed to that, which actually is a good indication of consumer power as far as football is concerned. We talked about it briefly yesterday, didn't we, about how it has its roots in a very kind of working class background, and it's gone into the stratosphere as far as wages are concerned. Well, the fans are saying enough's enough, and the executives are having to listen to that. Liberty Steel, this is in jeopardy. It's a steel producer in the UK. We talked about Greensill Capital and the failure of that, so it went bust early in March. Labour has been saying the government really needs to step in to save it. We go through this kind of stuff all the time with these big industries. I still think, very crudely, truly, I'm sure that really what you should be doing is finding out whether customers aren't seeing if they still want to buy it rather than propping it up with taxpayers' money. But that's, again, something for politicians. Now, I said I'd come on to inflation. We got the UK inflation up from 0.4% to 0.7%. I know it's not as high as yours is, but you see what's happening here. And I'm getting projections now, 0.7%, 1.5%, maybe 2.5% by the end of the year. Now, if you're starting off from a low base, those figures are quite high. So that's quite a worry. The second inflationary thing, now I know I interviewed Daniel Jürgen many years ago. He's Jürgen, he's seen as somebody who actually knows a lot about the oil market, and he wrote the definitive book about the oil market probably 25 years ago. I remember interviewing him at the time. What he's been saying is, and this will interest you, is that oil could be hitting $75 a barrel by 2022. This is because demand and supply pressures will begin to offset each other, and the markets are telling us that as the US recovers and China's already recovered, the demand will increase, the surplus will get less, and therefore the price will go up. He's known as an oil expert. I give you it for what it's worth. He's known as Daniel Jürgen. You'll be hearing from him over the months again. He sort of comes into the fore and then disappears again, but he is known as an expert. So there you have it. That's the global view. $75 a barrel for oil. That'll put prices up.
All right. Michael, great insight you've shared there, but two things I'd like to talk about. Increasingly, when I'm seeing these inflation numbers go up in the West, I get a little scared for us back here in Africa because, I mean, you always argue we shouldn't listen to the IMF, but the IMF and the American Fed did say, where they were making their projections, that if there's a rebound in the economy in the West and there's an increase in inflation, then definitely has a knock-on effect on the economy down here in Africa. I mean, what's your take on that narrative again? Because we're seeing inflation numbers go up in America, and now it's going up in the UK. I mean, this economy is tied to our economy. Secondly, would you call it hypocrisy, what China is doing? Yeah, China is going to speak at an Earth Summit or Earth Conference put together by Joe Biden. But they are one of the biggest polluters in the world. And we know that China has not met any of the caps, even from the Kyoto Protocol and, you know, the climate change summits. So what is China doing? Good question.
May I say, without wishing to pun a lot, these climate conferences are a lot of hot air, really, aren't they? I mean, yeah, for all those kind of reasons, developing economies like China, like India, and so on, they always say, yep, we do. We agree with those climate targets and all the rest of it, and we're going to host a big conference, a big international conference in this country in the autumn, and they'll all say, yeah, it's a very good idea. But when they actually get back home and they start to look at what they're doing and where their industries are going, do they want to pollute? Well, of course they do. Now, it could be that they pay to pollute, you know, this kind of carbon market that actually happens in the Western world. But it doesn't stop the fact that climate change is growing. Now, if you believe in it or not, I don't know whether you do, whether you don't. But the fact of the matter is that people, we have seen it. Scientists, I think, have more or less got on board and said, yes, there is something going on, and we really need to try to control it. You're quite right. There's a lot of hypocrisy there. As far as inflation's concerned, yeah, is it contagious? I think it probably is. Actually, I mean, I would caution that when you look at inflation, because they tend to be year-on-year figures, they tend to be a bit weak in terms of forecast because it's been very, very low. Then naturally, if it starts to rise again a little bit, then it looks like a spike, and this is something which the central banks are trying to look through. I'm not an expert economist, so I can't really tell you why inflation is contagious. I just sort of feel that rising prices are, because if we're talking about factory gate prices, if we're talking about commodity prices and so on, we're talking about oil prices. If those actually come through into a weak economy, then you are going to get price rises. So yes, I'm afraid it probably is true that we do face these kind of inflationary pressures. Against that argument, of course, is that, you know, demand economies may not grow in the same way that they have been growing over the years. Again, these are things that will be answered later on in the year. If you want to put a calendar date on it, it's very difficult to say. But, you know, my gut says, yeah, it is. Unfortunately, inflation is contagious.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael, for your time. We'll go for updates on COVID-19 pandemic to Adesu Amora. She'll be here with us, but after this quick commercial break, we'll be right back. Our pleasure to have you back. Still the morning show right here on the Rise News channel. Adesu Amora, over to you for COVID-19 updates.
Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Tundu, and good morning, Dr. Abati. Well, the COVID-19 has killed over 3 million people globally, while infecting over 142 million others. We have seen 8 consecutive weeks of increase in cases and deaths since we last saw a decline in January and February. Now, things are definitely out of control in India, in Brazil, and some other countries. And it's a clear reminder that it's premature for any country to declare victory just yet, despite the vaccination drive globally. Well, here in Nigeria, 120 new infections were also reported by the NCDC. It says 8 states were responsible for the new infections, with Enugu State, southeast of Nigeria, reporting the largest infections. Now, let's look at the vaccination data. According to the latest data released by the NPHCDA, 12,581 people are reported to have received their first jab of the AstraZeneca across the country in the last 24 hours. Taraba, Sokoto, Rivers, Abia, and Enugu states still have some of the lowest figures posted. Meanwhile, the health minister and the NCDC boss have been speaking on the latest vaccine development here in Nigeria. The minister was also hinting that the country may be considering other vaccine options, and our correspondent Ovietime George caught up with them in Bayelsa. Here's that report. Let's listen to it.
For many, countries instituting a lockdown is a decision to avert the spread of COVID-19, especially in the face of rising statistics of casualties. The use of vaccines is a major response to the pandemic. However, concerns are mounting globally over reported cases of adverse events associated with persons administered with the vaccines. Nigeria's Minister of Health, Dr. Osage Ehanire, is not oblivious of this development in a country where vaccine hesitancy is another talking point.
We haven't had that significant number of adverse effects, and if they are at all, they have to be well linked to as causative factors. All countries have that concern, and what we are doing now is studying, along with other countries, these adverse events, how connected they are, what the real causative issues are, and then gathering our own experience here. So we are also working on licensing other vaccines. As you know, Johnson & Johnson has also been authorized here in Nigeria. So we are going to be working on authorizing other vaccines as they become clear to NAFDAC.
Blood clotting and other adverse events may generate health concerns, but it seems solutions come in short supply.
Vaccines really are the best option that we have of getting out of this pandemic, getting to life as usual. There's not just one vaccine. It's just that the AstraZeneca vaccine was the first one that we've gotten. We have plans to get others. But it really doesn't matter what vaccine we get. The key thing is every vaccine currently available has gone through very rigorous tests to make sure that they can serve our people. And my advice to every Nigerian, especially everybody in Bayelsa State here, that did very well in the pandemic response, is to take whatever vaccine you have that comes to you in order to protect yourself, your family, and your community. And we will continue doing our very best to make sure we keep Nigerians safe.
For now, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is the only authorized preventive measure against COVID-19 in Nigeria. Ovietime George, Arise News.
Well, there you have it. So no specifics as to which vaccines we may be considering aside the AstraZeneca, which we currently have from the COVAX facility, and then the Johnson & Johnson, which we had been told earlier. And speaking about the Johnson & Johnson, just to inform you that the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, has found a possible link between the rare blood clots and the vaccines, but says the overall benefits of getting the shot outweigh the risks. That's the update I have. I have for you guys this morning.
Very quickly, let's start with Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Yes, the European Medicines Agency, known as the European Medicine Regulator, has said, yes, the cases are rare. It's nothing to worry about, even if there is a connection with regard to blood clots. Out of all the numbers that are, all the vaccines that have been administered, maybe just about 80 cases.
Yes.
And that, this blood clotting is nothing to worry about. Even in the US, where, as in Europe, the vaccine was paused, the administration of the vaccine was paused, the US authorities are meeting on Friday to consider whether or not they will continue with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, single-dose vaccine. And, you can imagine what the outcome in that regard is likely to be. But at the same time, there is a professor in the UK who pointed out that, look, the problem here may well be with the fact that the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are, based on inactivated adenovirus, and that may be the problem. But the good news, of course, is the effort by the scientists and also the readiness by Johnson & Johnson to continue to investigate and see whether indeed there's anything that can be done about this. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine generated a lot of interest, considering the fact that it's just a one-dose, vaccine. Now, as for Nigeria saying we're looking at other vaccines, there are no specifics. It's not enough to just go to Bayelsa and say, oh, we're going to get other vaccines. You'll recall that earlier in the year, the National Assembly said they were still waiting for the supplementary budget of about 400 billion for Nigeria to be able to procure vaccines. We have not heard anything about that. Around that time also, the Lagos State government talked about Lagos State getting vaccines on its own to be able to address the needs of the population in Lagos State. Up to this moment, we have no clarity in that regard. The only thing that is clear to us is that Nigeria is relying on the supply from COVAX facility, the donation by MTN, and there was an extra 100,000 doses that
from the Indian government.
From the Indian government, and we're also told we're talking to the Chinese. But clearly, we do not have enough vaccines, doses, to be able to achieve the objective of that 70% herd immunity that Nigeria is talking about by 2022. So we will need more clarity, because what we're confronted with at this moment is the fact that because of the shortage, we have used over 1.2 million doses out of the 4.2 or so that we have. And because of that, the Nigerian government said a few weeks ago that there will be a suspension of the administration of the vaccines. That should not be the case. We have been given a 2-week extension. Okay, after that 2-week extension, and people have taken the first dose, take the second dose. What happens? I think, the relevant departments, the NPHCDA, the Ministry of Health, the Center for Disease Control, should begin to think ahead and talk to us about how, they will circumvent this supply crisis that the entire world faces with regard to COVID-19. Countries like Canada can vaccinate their people 5 times over, and so what are we doing to even get the basic to reach that target of 70% herd immunity projected in 2022?
And it's all very well and good considering other vaccines, but do we have the storage capacity and other logistical issues? Because not every vaccine is actually amenable to our terrain here in Nigeria. That ought to be considered as well, so that we don't end up like African countries that we've seen recently who acquire the vaccines and have to get rid of them, have to burn them, waste them, because they just cannot be used.
Indeed.
I mean, another factor I'd like to talk about, and it's a good thing they raised the issue of the adenovirus
vaccine.
In the vaccine, is the fact that there's some work going on by some scientists saying that it might be triggering some platelet reaction, and that might be leading to the clot. But the most important thing we should understand here is that this will never outweigh the impact of COVID-19 in the body. Because the COVID-19 virus, too, once it gets into the body, does give blood clots. And it does ruin the system. And there have been people that have even talked about multiple organ damage as a result of COVID-19. So it's best we push back this campaign, give a disclaimer that, you see, it's going to be part of the side effects of this, and resume the vaccination challenge. Because what has happened, countries that have stalled the vaccination challenge should be able to get back on, and the backlog of production will cause a big problem. And this has set Europe backward. And that's always been the argument on the table, that even despite the fact that they were checking it, Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca vaccine, they shouldn't have stopped that vaccination challenge and that vaccination program across board. So I'm happy the EMA has talked about this now. They should get that back on board so they can effectively vaccinate people and start to push towards herd immunity. And it's really important we do that.
Yeah, well, as regards to Johnson & Johnson, it was and Europe, it was a company that decided to halt exporting vaccines to Europe out of abundance of caution while this investigation was going on. And you're right, Rufai. I mean, the company has now said on their leaflets, they're now going to include characteristics of the vaccine, how to diagnose and treat blood clots immediately. And of course, we should say that the amount of blood clots we see around the globe yearly is actually in the general population is actually more than the blood clots we're seeing in relation to COVID-19 vaccines across the globe so far.
Well, out of all the 690 million doses that have been administered so far, only 300 cases of blood clots have been established. And I think it's important that the European Medicines Agency has pointed out that henceforth, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson should put on their label that there is a risk of a blood clot. However, they still insist that it is very rare. And the professor that I was referring to earlier, who was talking about the linkage between Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, is Professor Jonathan Bull, a molecular biology professor at the University of Nottingham. And he says that maybe that's one thing that should be looked at with regard to the adenovirus and the inactivated, mode adopted by both Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. But at the end of the day, I think the point is still about countries providing the necessary leadership in the face of this pandemic and individuals following the guidelines, the protocols to protect themselves. Looks right that this virus is going to be with us for a very long time. As Chris Whitty and June Rain of the United Kingdom have expressed, have stated.